everyone. Welcome to a very special edition of Until Saturday. It's college football playoff semifinals mega preview. So big that we decided to do a crossover episode with Power Hour and Max and Sam. Guys, I am so excited to be with all of you. I'll just introduce everyone by name for those who are listening. Max Olson, Sam Kahn Jr., Chris Vanini, Nicole Auerbach. First of all, happy holidays, everyone. Not sure when everyone's listening to this, but hope everyone had a wonderful time with their family or a short time with their family, whichever is preferred. But really excited to talk about these games. We've been looking forward to them for a few weeks. How we doing, guys?
I'm good. I'm more on the short time with the family. I like the time with my immediate family, the extended family, not so much. So, but I'm good. I've survived.
I literally have a mountain of presents off screen here that I need to wrap. So we got to knock this out, guys. You know,
I am in my parents' basement. So now I'm truly an online writer. And also just realized I'm the only person here who doesn't have their name in a podcast show. So
all right. Well, Chris, we'll mention your name as much as possible.
You coming from the basement here, I hope this makes your takes like even more subversive. You know what I mean? I want to see what effect that has on you.
Well, and I like it too because Chris and I are both in the Midwest in basements, parents' basements at the moment. So we're gonna have our Midwest blinders on. You guys are Texas experts. We've got so much to get to. This is going to be a fantastic show. We're going to take a comprehensive look at Alabama and Michigan in the Rose Bowl. We'll try to determine who has an advantage in the trenches, how the Wolverines will approach Jalen Milroe, and if this is a career-defining game for Jim Harbaugh. We'll talk Sugar Bowl. Does Texas or Washington have the better offense? Can Washington overcome Texas's potent defense? Those topics and more in today's show. As always, friendly reminder to be sure to follow this podcast on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Please drop us a 5-star review. We'd appreciate it. If you leave a question, we'll answer it live on the show. You can also subscribe to Until Saturday on YouTube. And as always, if you want to be part of the Sunday Sound Off, leave a voicemail or text us on the Until Saturday phone line, 316-462-9852. Okay, guys, that's enough of the preamble. It's time to get into these games. We have talked enough about Florida State not being in these games. You know what? It's going to make it a little more exciting, I think. I think we're going to be more excited about how these teams match up now that we have Alabama. And, of course, we have Texas in ahead of them. So let's start with the Sugar Bowl. I really feel like this game has been overlooked a little bit. And I think part of that's because there was so much attention on the snub with Florida State and Alabama getting in, and then Michigan with everything that they've had going on off the field. So let's talk Sugar Bowl. I want to make sure we give this game the respect it deserves. Texas, number 3 in the country, 12-1, and Washington, number 2, 13-0. Over under on this game, 63 points. 51% of the money bets are on Texas. Texas is favored by 4 points. This is the first time the Pac-12 has had a CFP team since Washington was here in the 2016 regular season. This is the first trip to the CFP for the Longhorns, and they won their first conference title since 2009. So many storylines to get into with this game, but I want to start with the quarterbacks involved. It is star-studded. You've got Michael Penix Jr., Heisman finalist, and Quinn Ewers for Texas. So, Sam, let's start with you. You covered Texas so closely. Let's talk about these quarterbacks. How do you see this matchup, big picture?
This game is going to be a lot of fun to me because of these two. Because you've got two guys who's supremely talented. You got Quinn Ewers, obviously, we know the talent that he has in terms of just his arm ability, the way he's able to throw it down the field. They love to take shots in Steve Sarkisian's offense. They've got a ton of offensive skill. But guess what? On the other side, Washington's got the same thing with Michael Penix, who throws probably the prettiest deep ball in the country. And he's got 3 of the best receivers in the country to throw to. And so, to me, I would give the advantage in this matchup to Washington just because you look at how efficient and consistent I think Penix has been. Quinn is a little bit younger, and he's had some up and downs throughout his career. He definitely finished the season strong, but I think there's been times where you feel like Quinn can kind of zone out or they just hit a little of a rough patch in the middle of a game. And not that Washington hasn't. They certainly did in the middle of the season. But Penix is a little bit older, and I just feel like a little bit more consistent. And I think it's going to be fun to watch, though, because of the offensive skill on both these teams and the ability, just the pure throwing ability, these two quarterbacks. It's going to be a ton of fun to watch these two go.
Guys, I got asked this on a radio show a couple weeks ago, so I'm not trying to throw us off track here, but I want to quiz you here. Okay, the 4 teams in the college football playoff. I would assume the 4 of us agree you'd rank Michael Penix 1 out of 4.
Yes.
Yes.
How do you sort the other 3?
Oof.
Milroe, Ewers, McCarthy.
You put
That's how I do
McCarthy
it.
last?
We're gonna get to
Oh.
it. Yeah.
All
We're
right.
getting
Okay.
there.
Chris
We're
is
getting there.
teeing us up on a hot take here. Max, by the way, I appreciate, we were told by our producer Cam, he said twice before we started the show, let's keep it to an hour. Let's follow our show sheet. He gave us all this
I'd like to
great
talk
research.
through the careers of all 4 quarterbacks for the next 10 minutes. Just everyone clear out. I'm going to go ISO here.
Jackson,
No,
it's like,
I
hey,
appreciate that. I will
wanted
try to
to-
avoid subject changes. I do want to. I think it's an interesting question, though, because Quinn Ewers is coming off the best game of his career against Oklahoma State, which was not the best defense in the Big 12, but certainly played well in big games, played well against Oklahoma. So I think that injects some confidence in him. Texas is Sam, you could attest, the games they played against Texas Tech and against Oklahoma State, that's the best they've looked all year, other than probably the game down in Tuscaloosa. So they're kind of peaking at the right time. I think Quinn Ewers' confidence, he's gets this month to get even healthier after the injury he had this year. So I think it's kind of like a peak moment for Quinn Ewers to play well. And last year when Texas played Washington in the Alamo Bowl, that was the best that Quinn Ewers looked in his redshirt freshman year. Now, they didn't have Bijan Robinson, they didn't have Roschon Johnson, so he had to chuck it around. And they let him throw it 47 times in that game. He threw for 369 yards. The trouble in that game is they just couldn't sustain drives, and they only scored 3 points in the first half. And I think sometimes when you watch Texas, especially early in the season, and some of the games when like Wyoming and some of the games where you're like, this is closer than it should be. Sam kind of said it, like, sometimes just the kind of the flow is just a little off, and they're kind of getting into maybe like a 3rd and long, and they're having a 3 and out. And it's just kind of like, if Texas can get the right kind of pace and tempo and like just really like get a good start in this game, I think it's going to be a banger no matter what. But I think that I'm interested to see, can they kind of get the optimal performance here, because they've been playing well lately. And I think it's going to take that to outduel Michael Penix.
The thing with Penix, like the reason he probably didn't win the Heisman Trophy, the reason he finished second, is not because of the big games he played. It's because of when he played down, it was against the worst opponents, Arizona State's, Stanford's, and stuff like that. Every big game they've played, he has stepped up in a huge way. Oregon twice, Utah, on the road at Oregon State in a rainstorm, played, like, considering the elements, played pretty well. And so I think coming into a game like this, a big game, we've seen Penix every time he's on the biggest stage step up. And I don't think this will be a game where Penix just doesn't have it, because the games in which he doesn't have it is typically the games you wouldn't think. So, but between the two, I would take Penix, but Sam, Max, the 3 of us were there in Arlington for the Big 12 championship game, and that was the best he'd maybe ever looked.
Yeah, I'm with you guys on Penix. I mean, not only does he throw a beautiful ball, it's just the experience, right? Like, you just have this confidence because he's been through everything, and he's been through like some really challenging situations at Indiana. Now we look back kind of on that peak year, right? And what he was doing, Kalen DeBoer was doing to win at Indiana. And he goes through these season-ending injuries. Like, he's just such an easy player to root for. And then he just looks so smooth when it's going well, right? Like when you were explaining like all of these plays that he had to make, if it needed to be a 3rd down conversion, a 4th down conversion to seal a game, like he makes it work. And it's going to be really interesting, like tangentially with the NFL draft process, when people are going to talk about his injuries, his age, and the windup to the throw. But man, I really enjoy watching him, and I love those receivers that he's got. The interesting thing for me, looking at Quinn Ewers coming off his best performance as a Longhorn, is we haven't really seen the impact of no Jonathan Brooks really yet, right? So, what happens if a game does fall on his shoulders, and he needs to go out there and win it. And it's not coming super easily. You know, how is Quinn Ewers going to respond? There's some other areas of the game that I want to talk, this matchup that I want to talk about, Max. And let's start with you on this, because there are some incredible skill players in this game. Receivers. If you like receivers, if you want to look at who are going to be all over the NFL highlights 2 years from now, 3 years from now, you're going to want to watch this game. And we've raved about the Washington receivers a lot, but Texas has dudes too. So when you look at the receiving rooms and the secondary, the guys who are going to have to cover these receivers, who do you give the edge to?
Yeah, the playmakers in this game are going to be so fun to watch. I think the LSU duo probably is hard to beat if you're talking about like best receiver room this year. But in terms of like depth of quality of talent, I mean, I think Washington and Texas are up there with anybody. Obviously Roma Dunze, Blitnikoff finalist, over 1,400 yards, just one of the best in the country. We really saw Jalen Polk step up this year, especially with Jalen McMillan missing a few games. He had 1,000-yard year. I just think that the McMillan obviously is a great player, and that's another one that give him a little time. I feel like that's going to be great for this matchup. Texas's group is there's just a lot of diversity to how they can hit you, and I think that it's not just Xavier Worthy, it's not just AD Mitchell, it's the ability to get it to Jordan Whittington as a third option. It's the ability to throw it to JT Sanders and Gunnar Helm. A really good tight end duo. They're able to make plays out of the backfield with Keelan Robinson. So it's going to be, it's hard to know like who you give the edge to in terms of who's the better group. Honestly, guys, the tough question is like which secondary is going to get a stop in this game, because you know that Penix is going to take his shots. You know that Sark does a great job of setting up his deep shots and his big plays. You give both of these coaching staffs enough time to drop some fun stuff. I think it's going to be a crazy matchup. And I think the tough question, Sam, I'm curious what you think. Do you worry a little bit more about the Texas secondary in terms of this showdown, or should we be talking about the other side of that maybe the Washington defense is going to have a hard time with this?
Yeah, I think when I look at this one, I worry more about the Texas secondary, just because of the way when I watch Ryan Grubb and the way they call that offense, boy, they stretch the field vertically and horizontally, and they really do make you tackle in the open field. So that's going to mean you got a team that in Texas that's got two young safeties, Michael Taft and Derek Williams, who, by the way, is going to be out for the first half because he got a targeting penalty in the Big 12 championship game. Jalen Catalon's already hit the portal, so they're really going to be stressed in that secondary. And that's the one part of this Texas team that I think if you were trying to pinpoint a weakness that you could take advantage of, that's the one. And so when you're going against Washington's strength, that's the one where I'm concerned about if I'm a Texas fan. That said, you
can tell Oklahoma State wanted to do that too. Like when they looked 100%. At Texas, that was the one kind of thing they wanted to do early, is take some deep shots.
They wanted to take shots. Now on the flip side, we saw what Texas could do. Again, you're talking about two great play callers in Sark and Grubb. Sark's the first quarter, first quarter and a half, his first 20 are going to be terrific, and he's going to do the same thing. There's going to be a ton of mixed direction. He's going to throw guys off, and there's going to be guys running across the field wide open just because that's what he's able to do. And with this amount of talent, yeah, it is going to challenge Washington as well. But I think if I were given an edge, I'd probably give a slight one to Washington because of their strength going up against probably Texas' weakness.
The numbers on these secondaries is interesting. Like Texas is 94th in passing yards per game allowed, Washington 120th. But if you go by yards per attempt, they're both top 30. Washington's 25th, Texas is 29th. So like they've just had teams throw the ball on them a lot. And so it kind of depends on what numbers you look at. But Washington's secondary has given up 30 plays of at least 30 yards in general. So that is a defense that has been prone to giving up the big play as well. I think you're going to see both of these teams chucking deep balls like a lot.
Yeah.
And it's going to make for a very, very fun game. And who can get the key interception here or there? They both had, I think, 16 interceptions on the year, sixth nationally. So like these teams, these secondaries take chances. They get interceptions. They also allow some big plays. And the edge between the two, I'm not sure. I think they're just very different setups. But I guess I would say Washington right now.
Well, it's also Washington has different guys, right? Because of different injuries. And there wasn't a ton. We didn't get to see them at full strength all the time. and just how many weapons there were. I want to pose this to each of you guys. You are an NFL GM drafting a receiver. These are your options. It has to be from this pool. Yep. Who do you take first?
This is the problem we're going to have in our staff fantasy draft next year,
Well, our fantasy draft is always fun because we just all pick our favorite college players, and regardless of what their situation is. But okay, so
and it's an auction draft, so we really run it up on each other too. That makes it a lot of fun.
It's true. It's true. Okay, so who are you taking, Max?
Who are we taking? NFL future?
And let's say this group of receivers are all eligible right this second, and you have to take a receiver. You're a GM. Who are you taking?
I think Worthy might have the. Oh my gosh! I'm going to say a Doomsday because he's just so smooth at everything. But the tools that Worthy has are pretty special.
Right.
Doomsday. I mean, there are a lot of people who thought he should have won the Biletnikoff, or should have been the Heisman race.
Here's my pick: A.D. Mitchell. He's 6'4",
really good,
big dude. I was at the TCU game where he made that falling down catch to secure the game. He's played on this stage before. Curious what that means in a game like this. So that's my pick.
I'm taking Worthy because I love speed. He's got the track speed, and it's just when you get him in space and he can run away from a guy, you ain't catching him. So I'd give it to Worthy, even though he's probably about like 165 pounds dripping wet. Like he's a thin cat, but boy, he can go. He can really go.
All right, let's talk about the trenches, because this was something that a lot of games are decided that way, but I just think one of the defining moments of the season was certainly Texas beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and it was the way that they beat Alabama in the trenches that really, I think, opened up a lot of people's eyes to, hey, Texas could be back. Texas could be real. Like, this is a team that we thought on paper could win the Big 12. Well, here they are actually showing up and doing this against a really quality opponent. So, Sam, let's talk about the inverse of that in Washington's offensive line, their run game against Texas D line, or the opposite, whichever way you want to go. But I want to talk about the trenches and how you see some of those matchups.
Yeah, this is to me where Texas has the big advantage because they have one of the best defensive lines in the country, period. T'Vondre Sweat, one of the best defensive players in the country, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year, has been a monster, 362 pounds. He, by the way, fun fact, he weighed about 249 when he enrolled at Texas. So he has grown quite a bit and hasn't really lost a lot of the athleticism he had when he signed there. And so that's made him such a terror. But then you take Byron Murphy, who lines up right next to him, who is leaner, about 308, but he is super quick and difficult to handle. And those two guys have been, I've watched teams not run the ball, like not even try to run the ball against them at times. And that, to me, in some ways, I think helps Washington in that they don't have to rely on the run. That they I think, run it less than about almost every other team in the country. I think they're fourth to last in the country in rush attempts per game. But you still have to have some run presence to win. You have to be able to respect the run. And I'm just going to be fascinated to see how Washington attacks this and how they handle that, because Texas has been able to, this is why Texas has been able to win this year. This is why Texas has been able to win the close games. This is why they've been able to weather the storms whenever they've hit some struggles on offense, is because that defensive line is a terror. And, oh, by the way, coming off the edge, they can get after you too with Anthony Hill and Barron Sorrell and those guys. So I love this Texas front. And I think this is, if Texas ends up winning this game, this, in my opinion, will be the reason.
This is the matchup. This is the matchup that will determine the game.
This is the good on good.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because, by the way, Washington just won the Joe Moore Award for the best offensive line in the country. And they don't run it a lot, but they've been pretty good. That's why they were able to control the tempo and the pace and everything against Oregon. Nobody thought they'd be able to run the ball against Oregon's really good defensive front, and they did. Dillon Johnson had 152 yards and 2 touchdowns in that game. He had over 100 yards against Utah. Like, in those big games, Washington has been able to push you around. Again, just like Penix, it's in the other games, your Stanfords and your Arizona States, where they didn't. So can they, again, in a big game, move the line enough for Dillon Johnson to get through? But they've also never gone up against a pair of defensive tackles like Texas has had. So, like, we just talked about the quarterbacks, the receivers, teams are going to be chucking it deep. I think this game's down to Washington's offensive line against Texas's defensive line.
Chuck it deep.
That will be one of the lasting phrases in season.
I think that we haven't really seen a lot of moments this season when Penix was like really flustered and like he's so experienced and he's able to move off his spot and make the play, right, make the throw. But this offensive line's really good. I'm sure people probably expected Michigan to win the Jim Harbaugh Award because Michigan has like 10 starting offensive linemen. But this Washington group's really good and deserved it. And I think that, you're right to touch on Johnson. I think that was one of the best portal pickup of the year when he came from Mississippi State. And that, I think on both sides, you've got that kind of question mark of like, man, when things are going really right, this team can run for 200 yards. And Texas without Brooks, they ran it really, really well in their last couple games here. But that ability to kind of like, can we get what we want to get on first and second down and not get in third and longs? It's going to come down to O-line play. And I think Texas has got a nice young group. Washington's got a really experienced group that is going to be hard to beat.
Yeah, I wanted to hit on something real quick. Nicole, you mentioned it with Penix experience, and Max just touched on it of him not getting moved off. If he has time to throw, we go back to the Texas secondary, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough on Texas defense because when he has time and he goes through those progressions, you combine that with his deep ball accuracy, he's money.
He's going to smack him.
Texas is going to have to get pressure off the edge or pressure up the middle and get Penix off the spot.
Yep. And as you mentioned, I mean, they've game planned well. They've called great games. Ryan Grubb has a great ability to put all of these pieces together and put everyone in really positive and advantageous positions. Just to underscore how good this line has been outside of the Joe Moore Award, which is an incredible accomplishment because, like, the dudes that vote on that award are really evaluating O-line play, which is something that's really hard to do. But they've only allowed 11 sacks all season, 4th in the country, and 46 tackles for loss, 6th in the country. So this is an important group. The Dylan Johnson, the explosion or the impact he's had when he comes onto the scene has been huge for them. He's over 1,000 yards on the season. And it almost feels like he has been underrated because of how much we talk about those receivers and we talk about Penix.
And he had like a monster game against SC, and SC's defense is terrible, right? So like he kind of
it didn't count.
Like he's good. Yeah.
Didn't he have like almost 200 yards before contact in that game? That's something a little bit more about the defense. USC. That ain't exactly the Texas defense.
Yeah. By the way, talking to Big 12 coaches, they've said to me, a few people that play Texas have said, not only is like they think the Sweat Murphy duo is like something they've just like not seen before. Yeah. And I think a lot of people view Murphy as like maybe Sweat's the better player and deserve the awards this year. But there's a reason Murphy won Defensive Lineman of the Year in the Big 12. People feel like he had just as good a season, if not better. So interested to see, can those guys be the disruptors, run game and pass game that Texas really needs them to be?
And that is the reason Texas is here. That is the reason Sark got Texas to a level it hasn't been in a while on both sides of the ball. The moment he got there, recruiting the lines like crazy, offensive lines, defensive lines, they were so thin and weak in the trenches. That is like, we can talk about Quinn Ewers, the receivers. It's everything that Sark has done in the trenches is the reason Texas has gotten to this moment. They are so much better there. That's how they beat Alabama. That's how they got into the playoff. And that's going to be the matchup that determines this game.
So at the same time, Washington survived 2 games against Oregon, right? So, I mean, certainly from a physical standpoint, I know people might knock the pack, but they held up to those tests as well.
I think that's a great point because in each of the times, and it was really those Oregon games, so people wonder, in Utah, if Washington was physical enough, if they could take punches and throw them back, and they did. That's what's so impressive to me about Washington, and why I think, again, this game is a little bit overlooked, and I'm glad we're starting with it, because every time Washington needed a play or they're back against the wall, they made it. They did it. And so this is going to be a heavyweight fight. I am really excited for it. I think I'd be surprised if it was a blowout in either direction, just because of what we're talking about. We're talking about some of the best individual players and best units in the country squaring up against each other. One important factor we haven't even hit on yet is the coaching matchup, the head coaches, because we've hit on some of the coordinators. But you've got Sark and you've got Kalen DeBoer. They both have never been on a stage like this. Kalen DeBoer has an incredible career, which started in the NAIA level. He's basically lost very, very few games as a head coach ever at any level. Sark has done really well at Texas. This was the year where everything was aligning. We talked them up all off season. Ari went all in on them, as we all know. Anyone who listens to this podcast knows that. And they are in this position that they wanted to. They've been trying to get back to. They're competing for a national championship. And as you guys mentioned, you throw in Washington OC Ryan Grubb and the play calling, the offensive minds in this game. Chris, set it up from a coaching matchup standpoint, what you are looking for in this game or how you see it.
Well, Sark has been here before as an assistant coach.
Not as a head coach.
Remember, he took over. Remember, there was that 2020 they won the national championship.
Yep.
Before that was when Lane Kiffin Lane
for
Kiffin
FAU.
basically got fired after the semifinal win, and Sark came in for.
Well, he was a little too
game,
busy.
and they lost that game. But yeah,
was that the real estate time?
Yes,
was that
yes,
yeah,
that was when he was
right.
shopping for real estate.
Yep.
2005 USC too. He was I think he was on the sideline the 05 Texas USC game.
Okay, well, so Chris, before we start, then what's the difference for him? Do you think this is going to feel different as a head coach going through this experience?
No, I think he has the advantage of having been there. It's not going to be too much of the moment. What I am most interested with him is having had a month to prepare. How much in his bag is he going to be? Because again, the three of us were at that Big 12 championship game, and right from the get-go, you were like, "Oh, Sark's got some stuff to go with there." And they were leaving it all out there right off the bat in that game. But same thing with Ryan Grubb, the offensive coordinator at Washington, one of the best offensive coaches in the country as well. Remember, he turned down the Alabama OC job to stay at Washington because he knew what they had coming back. Now it turns out Alabama's here too, so maybe it worked out for everybody. But like that is, I'm really excited to see what both of these play callers are going to have cooked up, because with a month to prepare, with all the weapons that they have, it's going to be a lot of fun. So I think this is a fascinating coaching matchup for that reason. Kalen DeBoer, the head coach of Washington, he never gets too high or too low. Like he's always steady. He's 103-11 in 8 years as a head coach. He won, I think, 5 national titles at the NAIA level. So like this guy knows what championship games are about. It's not the same stage and all that stuff, but I think he's a good steady presence for them as well. So I think both coaches, high marks for everybody coming into this game.
I want to play for Kalen DeBoer. Like anytime I watch him do an interview or talk to his team, like
his post games are always like, "Yep, awesome. That was cool." He's just like he's always so chill. It always impresses me.
So chill. I love this because of the different circumstances, right? When we talk about the amount of pressure around the Texas job, and you guys have been around it, it is a fishbowl. The expectations are insanely high. They have not been to this level in a while. And then Washington, it's like, oh my God, this is year 2. It almost feels like it's a little bit like house money. And no, if this is not any shots at anyone, but just that how quickly this has happened, like how great a hire this was and how it's worked at Washington. And even like when Michael Penix Jr. came out of the portal, no one thought this was, he was capable of this. So let's talk a little bit about what Sark has gone through to get here. We all know his backstory, second chances coming back through Alabama to land this job. Sam, what did it take for him to get to the stage to actually put the pieces together to bring Texas back to this level?
Yeah, first, I think it took a really good plan. He had an idea when he came in. I talked to their athletic director, Chris Del Conte, about this, that when he interviewed, that was one of the things that impressed them the most, is he knew exactly what they needed to attack. And one of the top things was something that Chris just mentioned, line of scrimmage. We got to attack the line of scrimmage when we build this program, that we're going to build it inside out. And they've recruited that at a really high level. And more importantly, they developed them. We talked about T'Vondre Sweat earlier. That's a guy who was a 3-star recruit, and now he's turned into one of the best defensive players in the country. That's development. And then you take Sark as a play caller and then translating that into a head coach now. he's done a really good job of, I think, striking a balance between his strength of what he can do while still being a good manager of the program. And he hired a terrific staff. The one thing that I think is underrated about
those guys are still there on that staff too, Sam. The retention on that staff has been pretty strong, especially
the staff stability. 8 of the 10 full-time assistants have been there all 3 years. The recruiting staff, the personnel staff, a lot of the key support staffers, a lot of this staff has been there all 3 years. So that consistency and continuity is absolutely huge for this. And I think he's been a really good just CEO, even though he has been a play caller and has his hands on it. He's been able to strike the perfect balance. And I think this has been him kind of hitting what we thought. He became a head coach early at 33, and, things happen pretty fast. We all know, with what happened at USC when he got fired, but he's done a really good job, I think, of learning, taking those experiences, learning from his mentors, Pete Carroll, Nick Saban, and incorporating a lot of that into this plan now. And it's all at the right place at the right time. It's kind of all coming to fruition for him.
Real quick, we didn't even talk about Sark coached Washington as a head coach for a number of years. That's a pretty interesting storyline.
Coach Washington and his DC PK also was a longtime DC at Washington. So a lot of familiarity.
He was known as 7-win Sark there. That's where it came from, because they always went 7-5 every single year. And so he gets to Texas, and is he going to keep doing that again? He hadn't had that breakthrough season, so he finally gets it. And who's he facing in the playoff? Washington. I think that's pretty cool. Also, real quick, you mentioned the Texas staff. Nicole, got to mention here. Do you know who the offensive line coach is at Texas?
Kyle Flood.
Kyle Flood, former head coach at Rutgers.
Got to get we have to get a Rutgers mention into every show. I don't know if everyone listens to Power Hour every week, but that is the
contractual agreement.
Cool.
We did
contractual agreement. Okay, before we get off this game, one X Factor type question I want to ask. I'm going to ask you, Max. What is the impact of not having Malik Murphy there? Because now you've got Arch Manning stepping up as the backup quarterback. He did not see a lot of game action. We know why Malik Murphy made this decision. It makes sense if he's trying to find a different landing place to be in the market before the end of the college football playoff run. But what do you think the actual impact of that could be for a team that had a quarterback room working in a certain way, that had a player who stepped up and started when Quinn Ewers was injured, now not being available?
It is suboptimal for sure. I think that and I think Sark has said many times, Malik Murphy deserves a lot of credit for the fact that Texas is here, because he won those games that could have gone the other way. It's funny, both of these teams have their top backup quarterback in the portal right now, because that's just how it is these days. These guys have to go find somewhere to be in January. And so I think Malik Murphy was pretty torn in terms of making this move. I'm sure some people probably told him, hey, don't wait till after the playoff. You don't have to do this. But taking him out of the picture, it's tough for Texas, especially when you have Quinn Ewers, who's had some injury history in his 2 years as the starter. Of course, if it means that Arch Manning is stepping out to play in the Superdome, that's then that probably activates some superpower for him.
Yeah, right? I'm sure that wouldn't be a big deal by any stretch of the imagination.
People would freak out if Arch Manning had to go in this game, and it's tough for Texas. I think Malik Murphy it gives you a little bit of confidence if you had to put him in the game. And certainly Texas tried to wait as long as possible to put Arch in the game this year to preserve the red shirt. So certainly we have not seen very much of him so far this year.
I think he's got a little juice, though. I do. I think he's got a little bit of juice. He's got some velocity. Yeah, he's got some velocity on those throws.
You think he might be a good player, Sam?
I think he might be all right. And he's a little faster than people realize. And he took off
a little bit
times at Texas game. He can scoot, man. He's a sneaky fast guy. So I'm really intrigued. I don't think we'll see him in this game.
I mean, if we get Manning versus Penix, then the stars are going to matter and Texas wins. That's just no question.
Well, Sam, I'm not saying by design. This is more of an X factor. If something happens and Texas needs to go to a backup quarterback, what happens? What's different? So that's just want to throw that one at you guys. Yeah. Let's move over.
It's the only opt out of these two games, pretty much, right? I mean, we haven't. Thankfully, we don't have to really talk about that very much.
Yeah.
Are we making picks now, or are we waiting until the end to make game picks?
Do the end.
Let's do it at the end. All right, let's move over to the Rose Bowl. Number 1 Michigan, undefeated, 13-0 out of the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh missed, what did it end up being, a third of the season?
6 games. Half the season. 6 games. Well, 6 out of 13.
6 games?
3 and 3.
That's
3-3.
true.
Yeah.
Okay, half the season. But he's back. He was back at the Big Ten championship game. He's back for the Rose Bowl. Alabama snuck in at number 4 after beating Georgia in the SEC championship game. 12-1. That one loss on the year came to Texas in Tuscaloosa. They get in over Florida State, unbeaten ACC champ. Over under in this game, 44.5 points. Michigan is favored by 1.5 points. Kind of been that way since it opened. I think Michigan might have been a 2-point favorite when it first began. And fun fact from producer Cam is 92% of the bets so far are on the over in this game. This one also tons of interesting matchups, position groups, individual players, strength on strength, some questions about some weaknesses. I know we're going to get into the JJ McCarthy conversation a little bit later, but let's start in the trenches in this game as well. Max, you mentioned that people thought Michigan might win the Joe Moore Award again. They've won it a couple times now since it started, but instead that goes to Washington. You still have one of the best offensive lines, though, with the Wolverines. They're deep. Sam, how do they match up against Alabama? And then flip it the other way. How do those teams match up? Alabama's O-line, Michigan's defensive front.
You know, I really like this matchup for Michigan because they are still really good. They still have really played in the league level, even with the injury. This is not a traditional Alabama front that is just stifling, that will suffocate you. And we talked about it earlier when we were talking about the Sugar Bowl. Texas is the team that went and pushed this Alabama front around. And so it can happen. Even when you watch the win over Georgia, you watch early in that game, you know, big touchdown run, you watch the interior line push some of those guys around and open up some lanes. So if I'm Michigan, I am leaning on my strength here. I'm leaning on my run game. I'm leaning on my own line, and I am trusting them to go win this game for me. And that's one thing when we saw Michigan last year in the semifinals, that was one thing that struck me is I felt like they got a little out of character. I remember, I'll never forget the first drive of that game against TCU. They had a goal to go situation, and we've got Philly special going on at the goal line instead of running behind our then Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. Don't get cute, stick with your strengths, and go run and go see if you can get the ball Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum, and win the game with your strength. That's that. If I'm Michigan, that's what I'm doing.
So I had a quick response to that because I think it's an interesting comment with the way that Michigan has run the ball this year versus the way that they were last year, because I think we were all shocked with how they played TCU. But the thing that's been missing in most of their games has been an explosive run game. Mm-hmm. So Blake Corum has a zillion touchdowns on the season, but they're all like within the 5-yard line. They're short runs. If you get 3rd and 1, 4th and 2, like they can get that. But can they break off big explosive plays? That's been a question. And Donovan Edwards hasn't been very impactful this season. I think he is an X factor in the game because he can be a pass catcher as well. But if you look at where this team ranks nationally, like long rushing plays, 30 yards or more, they are scrolling, 73rd in the country. They don't have that many of them. They only have 6 plays of 30 yards or more on the ground. So they are not that, you don't have that home run threat, it feels like. They did against, in like 1 or 2 games, maybe 1 game. Against Ohio State, there was some of that. But there really wasn't in any other game. So I'm curious about that, even behind a great offensive line.
Also, against America's best defense, they rushed 34 for 66 against Iowa, which is slightly concerning.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've seen Michigan on the big stage here, and they have not been able to do in the trenches what they are purported to be able to do. TCU rushed for 6.4 yards per carry last year. It was better than Michigan. Remember the talk coming into the game? Big 12 team, you know, they can't run the ball, that kind of stuff. Then turned out TCU could run the ball. So, like, I'm always kind of curious on these big stages what Michigan can do. And like our producer Cam put some really interesting numbers here in the document. So Iowa blitzed only 20% of the time in that Big 10 championship game. 3rd lowest Michigan had faced all year. They had the lowest yards per play of the Jim Harbaugh era. 3.3. Wow. They allowed 4 sacks. Look, Zach Zinter's out at right tackle. That's a big loss for Michigan's side. And they have major issues at the tackle position. Alabama's front, not what it has been in the past, but I don't think Michigan's front is what it has been either.
And just to underscore that point, Florida State, one of their big talking points going around Selection Sunday was that their offense has outperformed Michigan's offense down the stretch with their backup quarterback. So yeah, there's a lot that needs to get fixed. And JJ McCarthy also obviously wasn't playing as well down the stretch and without Zinter as well. Let's flip it over though as well, because Alabama's offensive line also not what we typically think of when we think of Alabama's offensive line. This is a team that is allowing more sacks and pressures than we are used to seeing. 43 sacks on the season, which ranked 115th in the country. They were better down the stretch, and they were definitely better at giving Jalen Milroe the time that he needed to make things happen against Georgia. But Max, what are you concerned about, or how do you see that particular matchup going?
Yeah, I think that if you give Alabama a month to prepare for this game, I think, or sorry, if you give Michigan a month to prepare for this game, and do legal scouting, all that kind of stuff. Like, I think the thing that they're going to circle probably is can we find some weaknesses on the Alabama offensive line? And they started a true freshman, Caden Proctor, 5-star recruit, and he got better later in the season, but really was among the leaders in terms of sacks allowed by a freshman this season. Really had some struggles early on. Some teams were able to get him. So I think they're going to be able to, I think Michigan's going to pinpoint some spots here where they're going to try to apply some pressure, especially on critical downs. And, I think the Alabama piece too didn't have Jace McClellan in the SEC title game. Like, I think the run game, you've got good options, but you don't necessarily have like a monster there. So I'm interested to see in that same conversation, like, where is that kind of consistency in terms of turning out yards on early downs? And, I like the backs they've got, but is there a guy that's going to go run for 200? Probably not. It's going to be a team effort there against the Michigan front that, certainly did not get beat by very many people. And as I have tweeted about 100 times this year, really, they were not letting anybody even get inside their goal line. You know what I mean? So I think it's going to be interesting to see. Bama's going to take their shots. Obviously, it's a kind of boom or bust sometimes with that Alabama offense. But can Alabama go get the physical stuff against them? Is going to be it's going to be interesting to see in terms of tone setting in that game. Can they do that consistently?
That line was a turnstile early in the season.
Yeah.
Remember that the Alabama-Texas game? Every single time Jalen Milroe was dropping back, he had no shot. He's running for his life every time. The USF game after that, it has gotten a lot better. And so I think if you look at the stats around Alabama's offensive line, it kind of doesn't tell the whole story. They allowed 8 sacks over the last 5 games. Only 4 of those were against Georgia. So like, it did get a lot better, but there are holes. It's a very young offensive line against a Michigan defensive front that is very experienced, seniors and juniors across the board.
I think some of that too is just maturity for Jalen Milroe. Obviously being a first-time starter, there was a lot of growing pains early there. He's going to take some sacks at times and make some decisions that probably are not in sync with the plan. And this has too at times been a feast or famine group in the passing game where they may have some negative plays, but they also may beat you with a 50-yard bomb over the top to Jermaine Burton. You talked about the explosive plays earlier, Nicole. This is an area where Alabama really does have a shot if they can give Milroe time, because they do. It may not be the receivers that we saw 5 years ago at Alabama, but it's still a pretty good group.
Yeah, the numbers on real quick. The number on Caden Proctor I mentioned, he played probably his best game against Georgia, but on the season, 33 pressures, 11 sacks allowed at left tackle there. So interested to see how Michigan focuses in on him.
Yeah, another guy to watch as you talk about kind of some of those big plays. Mike Sandersill, he's the heart and soul of the Michigan defense. Feels like he's always
plays.
He felt like he always came up with a big interception, and obviously he's got a receiving history, so he often great hands and ran back a lot for impactful plays too. So let's fully shift the conversation to Jalen Milroe and JJ McCarthy. These quarterbacks, a little bit different than the 2 quarterbacks that we were talking about in the first semifinal. Feels like they were moving in different directions towards the end of the season because, as you guys mentioned, Jalen Milroe was improving. He was getting more confident. He was making better decisions down the stretch. JJ McCarthy had his worst performances down the stretch of the season. Those were also Michigan's most challenging games. Like, their schedule was very, very backloaded. But I'm curious when you guys are looking at this game and like someone's going to need to make a play or someone needs to control the game, someone needs to make good decisions, where you lean or where you think about this or how you view these strengths and weaknesses of these quarterbacks. Max, let's start with you, and you can start with either guy, but I'm very curious to see how they both perform on this stage, which, by the way, JJ was in last year and played poorly against TCU. And then Jalen Milroe has not obviously played in a semifinal yet.
Yeah, I think that as great as Penix is, and he's unbelievable. I imagine if you polled the coaches in this playoff, some of them might circle Milroe as like the guy they're maybe the most afraid of, because just the dual threat. Like if he were to level up in this playoff, then Alabama's got a chance to win it all for sure. And I think that. Sorry, go ahead.
He is one of the fastest quarterbacks I've ever seen.
Yeah, his dual threat upside, if you take out sacks, he ran for 705 yards this year, 41 first downs, 12 touchdowns, just really explosive. And I think that, I'm curious to see, I think Tommy Rees did a nice job over the course of the season of adjusting to, here's the throws we want to go for with Jalen Milroe, and let's not throw the ones that he shouldn't be throwing. Right. And I think that certainly, if you spend a month on Alabama and you're, Michigan's defense, they're going to, try and put him into some spots where it's not just about applying pressure, but can we make him make some throws that maybe are more low percentage throws for him? So I'm curious to see. I bet his confidence is going to be pretty high rolling into this, and I think that escapability. I think Texas did a good job of accounting for it. Sam with Anthony Hill as the spy. What do you do if you're Michigan to kind of make sure you've got a guy accounting for that? And then JJ McCarthy, like, I don't know how long you guys want to talk about JJ McCarthy, but he's like kind of, he's kind of
Chris
like
is like warming
dynamic?
up. He's getting
He's
ready.
dynamic.
Chris just tossed off the warm ups. Yeah, he's ready to go. Is he like the X factor of the playoff? He kind of is, right? I don't know.
Look, there are times when you look at JJ McCarthy and you think that's QB3 right there. Like potentially coming out for this year's NFL draft. There are times when he makes throws that are unreal. His ability to throw on the run, very strong. And yet this year, he's done nothing, like nothing of note. And especially down the stretch. Yeah, they won those big games at the end of the year. He threw 8 passes against Penn State. He threw for under 150 yards in the last 4 games. And, he completed at least 70% of the passes in 3 of those games. So, he wasn't losing you the game, but he wasn't winning you the game. And so, some people think he's maybe banged up a bit, might be hurt a little bit, and that's why he wasn't moving as much. Or maybe a month out from the Big Ten championship game, he's just healthy and it'll be a new him. But, they probably beat TCU last year if he doesn't throw 2 pick sixes.
Yeah.
When he has not been asked to win them a game in his career. And that will probably have to happen in this game. Now, I know people point to the Ohio State game last year. Yeah, he had a couple of deep throws. It was like, that's it. It wasn't like he was out there making throw after throw after throw to win you the game. I'm fascinated to see what he does in this game because I think he's got all the talent in the world. Like, you see it. But in the biggest moments, either he hasn't stepped up or this year, they haven't put it on him. They haven't asked him to go out and win the game because maybe they haven't needed to, but they're going to need to in this game.
Michigan turnover margin. I was going to say real quick, Michigan turnover margin plus 17 this year. So at least they're taking care of it. And you're right, Chris, that was the backbreaker against TCU was just the turnovers by McCarthy. So he's played clean, but it's a fair criticism for sure.
Do you know how many touchdown passes he's thrown in his last 5 games? 1.
5 games. 1. Yeah.
1. He's thrown 1 touchdown pass in the last 5 games. But he has taken care of the ball. And I'm kind of with you guys. You really do see it sometimes. You really see the ceiling with him. I think he's a really incredible talent, but you don't see it all the time. And like you said, they don't ask him to do it. Whereas Milroe has made some mistakes, but I think you see him flex a little bit more often. And so if you go back to the question, who are you picking in this game? If you had to put the game on one of these quarterbacks, McCarthy's more experienced, but I think I put it on Milroe, and I think I'll go back to the dual threat ability because that I think is such a game changer for them. Even though McCarthy is really good on the move and I think can throw it on the move, but Milroe is, I think, with what he can do in the run game, to me, I think gives Alabama a slight edge.
There are times when I think of JJ McCarthy, and I like 2 years, 3 years from now, I see him in the NFL starting and playing well, and I was thinking, where was that at Michigan? Like,
yeah. So do you think it's a trust problem, or like, you know what I mean? Like, I would love to hear what you think on that, Nicole.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. I don't think it's like that he doesn't have these skills. I just think the way that Michigan, and this actually gets into, we're going to talk about the coaches as well, but part of the reason that this narrative is that Michigan is built the way that they're built now is built better to win the Big Ten than to contend for a national championship is because they are not really stretching that offense in the regular season. And we've waited for it the last 2 years where they have this really heavy emphasis on the run game saying, hey, well, when are they going to let JJ throw some deep balls and kind of stretch the field vertically and add that wrinkle? Or when is he going to really use his legs, right? And sometimes, he was banged up this year towards the end as well, so some of the leg stuff. But they are comfortable winning low-scoring games or games where they are relying on the run game and shorter passes. Like last year, I remember fixating and watching each week, like the average, like the depth of throw for him and how, he was so accurate, like within 10 yards. But then they were barely trying to throw mid-range and deep balls. So I don't think at all this is his skill set. I just think this is the way that Michigan wants to win. And he doesn't seem to care about his individual stats. So like there isn't really a lot of friction on that. Like he was super happy after the Penn State game when he only threw it 8 times, which you also had an offensive line coach, offensive coordinator as the head coach in that game, right? So I also kind of just put a little asterisk next to that one in terms of the way the game was called and what you're comfortable in a challenging environment against a good defense. What do you rely on? But I think that, Chris, you could totally get that scenario happening where JJ does all sorts of things in the NFL that we didn't even see him attempt at Michigan. And that's why I wonder if we are going to see something different. Michigan has really struggled with the long layoff. They have not been a good team in bowl games under Jim Harbaugh, and they have not played well in the college football playoff the last 2 years after getting there. And we have wanted them to add more wrinkles or add different things that they might have to do to win a game in the CFP era, in the CFP part of the season. And they haven't done that. So that's, I think, the big question. And Sam, I think that speaks to your point about if you need someone to go out there and win the game, don't you put it on the guy who's shown that he can do that? 4th and 31 to save the season, can do it.
100%. That's ultimately when you get to a game of this caliber with teams that are evenly matched, those are the types of plays and players that make the difference, is the guy who can make the off-schedule play with the game on the line. And that's where, like you said, I think McCarthy has the ability to do it. I think we've seen some of that. It's just he's not asked to. And Milroe, I think they're a little bit more willing to allow him to do that, even though he's been, had his growing pains this year as well. But it's going to be fascinating to watch these two go.
Chris, I want to hone in a little bit more specifically on the coaching matchup. We've kind of circled around it on some of the, again, Jim Harbaugh's teams in the postseason. We've talked about him missing half the season due to suspensions in the NCAA investigation. Tommy Rees, what he did over the course of his season, his first year as the OC at Alabama. And then, of course, you've got Nick Saban, who has seen it all, won it all, knows how to get the most out of his team, and really has done a phenomenal job with this particular team over the course of the season. So how do you see the coaching matchup, Chris?
You guys know what Jim Harbaugh's bowl record is at Michigan?
Like 1-7.
1-6. Lost 6 straight.
Ooh, yikes.
And the 1 year that he won his first bowl game, he's lost the last 6. So for whatever reason, like you said, that long layoff has not gone well for Michigan in games that matter and games that don't matter so much. And so, like, I posed this question on our reaction show. How do we view Jim Harbaugh at Michigan if he loses this game? If he is 0-3 in the playoff, and through everything he's done, he beat Ohio State and won some Big Ten titles, but never got them any higher. Like, how much pressure is on Jim Harbaugh in this game, on top of the season that he had where he was suspended 2 different times, and Michigan has received a notice of allegations about him possibly lying to the NCAA about things. Like, there's a lot surrounding him. The NFL future stuff we're talking about too. Like, there's a lot of pressure on Jim Harbaugh here. Not that he would say it, maybe that he doesn't even feel it, but the takes, the narratives about what he has accomplished at Michigan is going to be a lot. And I can't imagine what Paul Feinbaum is going to say if Alabama wins.
The vibe could not be more opposite from last year's Fiesta Bowl, when all week long it honestly seemed like Michigan just did not care what TCU was bringing to the table. Like, just assumed TCU could not hang with them at all. Yeah. Very overconfident. Complete opposite this time.
Yeah, I remember that.
We all saw the reaction on the announcement show.
So I was in the room for that. I do want to give a little context, okay? Because
please do.
Okay, so I was in there. I was doing interviews with the Michigan players and Harbaugh for BTN. So part of it was like, so you see Texas, and there were a lot of like, oh, because everyone, like, nobody knew what 3 and 4 were going to be. So when they saw Texas, they assumed it was going to be Florida State, and there were multiple players doing like the tomahawk chop. Like, they thought those were the two teams, and they didn't know which order they would be in. So when it was Alabama, it was shock more so than, oh crap, we have to play Alabama now. It was, we thought we were playing Florida State. So I think people were a little bit too much into that, because
they would have felt a certain way about playing Florida State, though.
Yeah, they would have cheered, whatever. Yeah, like, well, but again, that's why, like, after Texas showed up, they were like, they reacted, because then they were like, okay, great, now we have Florida State. So it was just like there was a lot of emotions going in.
Sounds like disrespect to me, just like they did to TCU.
Spoken like a Michigan State alum, always bringing up disrespect. But to me though, like, that point is an important one where, if they beat Alabama and play for a national championship, like, all of those ghosts or all of those criticisms go away, because it wouldn't be just Florida State without their quarterback. Like, it would be like a real serious team, gold standard program to beat, to actually get over that hump. And it's like, this is the one thing that they haven't done. He got over the Ohio State hump. They won Big Ten titles, and then they've face planted at this stage. So it would be different even than if they beat TCU last year. I think people would still be like, it was TCU, right? Because so many people were just overlooking TCU. People are still talking. People were using TCU as an example of not wanting to put Florida State in the playoff, even though that was a championship game matchup, because people like forgot that they actually won a game in the semifinals. It was a whole thing. But I think that this is a better opponent or a matchup from those standpoints of, like, you will be focused. You will not overlook anyone. You have a whole month of preparation. But then, of course, Nick Saban also has a whole month of prep to prepare for you. Right. So that's a whole separate thing as well.
Here's the thing. What if Michigan loses 3 straight semifinal games, 2 of which they were the favorite in? Like you could say, oh, if they beat TCU or whatever. That TCU loss last year was terrible.
But Chris, what are you saying? You're saying people...
I'm saying if Michigan loses this game, do we reconsider them as a top 5 program in the sport? If they have gone this 3 years in a row beating up on a bad Big Ten, you beat Ohio State, and that's
then they would talk about him the way they talk about Lincoln Riley. Probably.
I was going to say that they would get there.
Exactly. That's exactly what it would be.
Yeah, but people still would put Oklahoma in the preseason top 5 and pencil them into the playoff.
Roll their eyes at it and stuff like that, and talk about how great the defense is if they give up a bunch of points, because they got pantsed by Georgia 2 years ago, and that TCU loss last year, to see what happened in that national championship game and to realize that TCU team beat Michigan, that is inexcusable for a Michigan team that was on top and favored going into that game. And yeah, Alabama theoretically is a much tougher opponent. It's a team with a bunch of national championships. But if you lose to a 4-seed Alabama that early in the season nobody thought was going to make it here, like, that's a bad loss. And by the way, we need to all apologize to Alabama. None of us picked Alabama to go to the playoff in the preseason. None of us did. And after that,
or the midseason.
That's right, the midseason too. Yeah.
Well, hey. Yeah, but hey, the committee did what they were actually supposed to do. I'm just right.
Saying, we all counted out Alabama. That loss to Texas, the USF game, still one of the most baffling games I've ever seen in my life. This is one of the best coaching jobs of Nick Saban's career. Easily. And if this team, the team that barely beat USF, beats Michigan to go to the national championship game, like, he's already the greatest coach of all time. this is just another one you put on the trophy shelf there. That would be incredible.
And to your guys' point, Paul Feinbaum probably will be there. I'm sure he'll be on set and having a show, and he could interact with Jim Harbaugh directly. Okay, guys, we are going to wrap things up. We're going to do a thought experiment from Max, and then we're going to make some real picks. Max wants to do, here's why Team X will win the national championship, and here's why Team X will lose in the semifinals. So does anyone want to claim a team and stake this out and go first?
I'll take Texas.
So we're each picking a team about why they'd win it all or lose in their semi game?
Yeah, both. Give me best case, worst case.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Oh, that's how I read it.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right, let's start. Sam, let's start with you. Let's start with Texas.
All right. Texas wins the national championship because of all the pieces they have, because their defensive line continues to dominate, because of the offensive skill that they have and the execution that they get from head coach on down. I think this Washington matchup is really good for them, and I can absolutely see them winning at the line of scrimmage and thus getting a rematch with Alabama in the title game in Houston, by the way, which is only 2.5 hours away from Austin. About 100,000 Longhorns live in Houston. So if Texas gets to the title game, it's basically going to be a home game, just 2.5 hours away from campus. So if Texas is to lose in the semis, it's because they cannot get enough pressure on Michael Penix and leaving that secondary exposed, and that Penix and that receiver group shreds them down the field.
All right, Max, give us the Washington case.
I think Sam's right about that. I'd also mention red zone offense for Texas. That's been a problem in some of these big ones.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Washington, the case for Washington win a national championship. I think that they've proven twice against Oregon that they can hang with the biggest, toughest, most physical teams on their schedule. They're the best of these four teams at generating 20-plus yard plays. I trust them to get chunk plays against anyone. They're the best of these four at converting third downs. We saw like moments like the Apple Cup, right? The fourth down option call. Like they have the dudes and they have obviously the onions to call the right stuff and convert in clutch moments. And they literally have had to find a way to win 9 straight Pac-12 games, a lot of them close. Like they were all pretty close in terms of final score. So I think those close wins generate some confidence. And they've got the best quarterback. I think we all agree they got the best quarterback, which maybe we should be talking about them as the national champ contender a little bit more out of these four. They're probably the one we probably expect the least. If they were to lose against Texas, I think, 41st in stop rate, 119th in terms of allowing touchdowns in the red zone. I do think you can throw the ball on them. They've given up too many explosives versus the pass. And I think there's just been some offensive lulls this season. Like, I don't know that anyone can explain how they scored 15 points against Arizona State. If some of those kind of hit in some untimely ways, they've certainly are playing teams that have got more talent on paper. So that I could see those being things that concern you a little bit.
Okay, I'll take Alabama. I'll let you take Michigan. Why Alabama would win the national championship? Coaching. I think they have the best coach in the game, in the history of the game, and the adjustments they made throughout the season, the adjustments they made against Georgia to stop blitzing as much and playing some different types of defense, that was what kind of turned that game around for them. So I think with the time to prepare and with a Michigan assistant coach now on your staff right now in George Hilo, Alabama's got the coaching to win the national championship because they've done this before. Why they would lose? They don't hold up in the trenches. The early season concerns about the offensive line happened, and Jalen Milroe's always on the run. Whether it's just, and Michigan's able to wrap up, pressure, contain, and Jalen Milroe can't be explosive as he is. So that's why Alabama can win it all, or they could lose. I think all four of these teams could win the national championship or lose. That's why I like this thought experiment.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of seasons where we would not say that. There have not been a lot of competitive semifinals.
Also, did you guys see USF the other night? Like, that's a quality win for Alabama.
It is.
Well, yeah, didn't
we didn't think so back then.
They won by double digits, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Jalen Milroe didn't play in that one. Okay, so the case for Michigan is that they have figured out how to get over the hump for all of the other things that Michigan wanted to do under Jim Harbaugh. They figured out how to beat Ohio State and then beat them again and then beat them again with an interim head coach. They have been incredibly resilient with all of the off the field issues, multiple NCAA investigations. And again, the different in and out of who's coaching, who's in charge on Saturdays, they have responded to all of that incredibly well. JJ McCarthy is experienced. He knows how to make good decisions. He hasn't shown it all the time, but he can throw a really nice deep ball. He can put some zip on the ball. Yes, he can, Max. He can. We just haven't seen it very much. Come on.
Me this time.
There. And he should be healthier. So you should have a little bit of a threat on the ground. Donovan Edwards is, I think, an X factor in the pass game. I think that he finally has a number one wide receiver in Roman Wilson. That's something that's been missing the last couple of years. And Michigan uses the tight ends well. The defense will have to be as good as advertised, right? We've talked about this. It hasn't shown up against the best teams in the CFP when they played in these semifinals, and didn't show up against Georgia, TCU last year. So all those things need to go right. They need to actually prepare and focus and play well after a layoff. But if they do all of that, I think that they could certainly beat another really good team. They had all their most challenging opponents on the back end of the schedule, figured out ways to beat them, different styles of play, different games, and they can do that again. Alabama, I think for Michigan, if they get over the hump of this game, would be able to win it all, because I think this is the stage that has tripped them up. I think they could certainly lose for all the reasons they've lost the last couple of years. JJ McCarthy makes mistakes, bad decisions. Maybe the run game doesn't show up like we saw it in a couple of those games down the stretch where it really couldn't get anything going, no explosiveness, really can't get chunk yardage, scoring plays. You're going to be up against an offense that will have explosives. You're going to have to keep pace. You're going to have to stay in the game. And then what if that, the offensive line and some of the areas we say maybe they're not as good as the last couple years, just really aren't, and they're not able to control the game at the line of scrimmage. So I could see them losing to Alabama that way. And again, like you guys said, if the game comes down to quarterback play, people are probably going to go with Jalen Milroe there, and the way that we've seen him develop as the season's gone on and the chemistry he's built with different receivers, different points in the season. So I agree with you guys. I think that we can make a case easily for all four, make a case for them all to lose for all four. There's a lot of strength on strength. There's also a lot of here's my questionable area against your questionable area, and we'll have to see how these things go. But before we go, we are going to make picks. Let's start. We keep doing the Sugar Bowl first, so let's start there. Sam, let's go with you. Who are you going to take to win? And you don't have to give me a score if you don't want to, but if you do, feel free.
Yeah, I'll take Texas to win. I think that ultimately they're going to win at the line of scrimmage in this one, and I think it's going to be fun though. I think it's going to be a high scoring. I really am feeling the over on this one. By the way, I think there's going to be a lot of points put on the board, so I like Texas to win in the Sugar.
That over under 63. By the way, that's a lot.
I'll take it.
I'm gonna go Washington. Close game. I'll agree on the over. I think the only way Washington wins is if it's a high scoring game, because they're going to have the offense show up. They've showed up in the big games. I think they're able to run the ball enough. They stay out of the middle of that defensive line. Penix makes a couple big plays. Roma Dinze makes a couple big plays, and I'm going to go Washington.
Yeah, I thought Washington will lose to Oregon the first time. I thought Washington would lose to Oregon the second time. At some point, I probably need to just learn my lesson. Washington, the final score of their games have been all pretty similar in terms of but I think it's a 31-28 type of game personally. And I'm gonna lean Washington today.
Wow. Max, I did the exact same thing. I have fully given up on trying to predict or just think the other team is better, because Washington just figures out ways to win, and they are tougher. They are more physical than I thought, than other people thought.
Sure. There's
a reason the eye test doesn't get to decide the outcomes of the actual games, and they play them. So I'm also taking the Huskies. There's just something about this team, and maybe they are the best team. Maybe they are going to win the whole thing, and we've all just been kind of waiting for them to lose because they've had so many close games as the season went on.
I'm feeling less good about this now that the three of us picked Washington. I thought Max was picking Texas for sure. Now we're all picking Washington. I don't feel good about that.
Oh well, let's see how we pick the Rose Bowl. Chris, you want to go last so that you can always be a dissenting voice here?
I don't.
Would that make you feel better if you went last, or do you?
I think it'll make him feel better, because then he can either
I'll be a dissenting voice on this one. But you guys go.
Okay. All right, Max, why don't you go first?
Well, I mean, at this point in the season, part of me wants to say like, no weapon formed against Jim Harbaugh shall prosper, right? I mean, look how we got here, guys. But I am going to go Alabama. I think I'm talking myself into a little bit of Jalen Milroe leveling up, being a big problem. Alabama, I'm interested to see, can they get guys to step up in the receiving core? They don't have the big time difference maker. I think that Burton and Bond have been playing better lately, but I lean Alabama in this. And Chris, I hadn't thought about it enough, but you set it up well. The narratives, if Alabama wins this game, are going to be out of control. The post game talk on Michigan is going to be crazy. I hadn't even thought about it, but in some ways I don't want to experience that. But I think Bama's going to win.
I'm going to take Alabama. I think Nicole referenced it earlier, but I think with the explosives they can get offensively, Michigan is going to have to probably play with them to a certain degree, and I just don't know that they can offensively. And I think between the explosives in the run game with Milroe and then the deep passing game, I think that's going to make the difference, and I think we're going to end up seeing an Alabama-Texas rematch in Houston.
Oof.
No, I thought I was going last. You go, Nicole.
Okay, all right. Well, I am going to take my preseason pick. I'm going to ride them all the way out, especially because I do think a lot of people are going to pick Alabama to win this. So somebody's got to be different. We got to break up the memes. We got to break up the bulletin board material.
Did we all have Michigan for our midseason when we redid it? I had Michigan winning.
I did.
Nicole,
not winning at all. I think I had Georgia the whole way.
Okay, Sam.
Okay,
I did. I think I still had Michigan. I had Michigan preseason. And
all right, so you guys are abandoning them. I'm riding with them all the way through. At some point, Jim Harbaugh has to figure this out. He has to figure out how to get them to play better after almost a month off. There is so much talent on this roster. Like, there will be a ton of future pros. You have someone like a Blake Corum who is capable of breaking off big plays. We just haven't seen it very much. But he's still there. Donovan Edwards is still there. Like, these guys that we've seen do things are still on this roster. And again, at some point, the dam has to break. This is a team that figured out how to beat a program that figured out how to beat Ohio State, figured out how to win all these games without their head coach this year, with different head coaches, acting head coaches. So I think that they are going to do it, and that this is going to be the bigger hump than it would be to win a national championship in the championship game, because I think this is the stage, and to have to go through Alabama and Nick Saban to do it. Yeah, why not? I mean, I think there's incredible stories both ways. And I also think that wouldn't it be pretty fitting for college sports that program under 2 NCAA investigations possibly wins the whole thing? It's like when Kansas got the trophy and Bill Self got the trophy a couple years ago in basketball. Feels a little faded.
That would be hilarious.
I'm going to Alabama. You guys already explained it. Let's get on to the championship picks.
I'm not prepared to do that.
No, I thought we were just
semifinal.
No. This is a semifinal preview.
No.
Yeah, well, we've let's. You don't want to theoretically pick your
No, let's wait till the games to get.
No,
played.
maybe we'll get to do another crossover.
Let's leave the listener in suspense.
Chris,
I'm going Washington. That's my pick.
Okay.
So
all right, Chris.
All right.
Chris just
even though I don't
doesn't
feel
listen.
good about it now.
This is what Power Hour's like every week. Chris just goes off the rails, tries to talk about wrestling. But that will do it for this.
Will the Undertaker be there? Will the Undertaker be?
Okay, all right. Someone mute. Cam? Can you mute his mic? I think the show.
Take away
over.
This man's mic.
Okay, take it away. This has been a blast. This is a very special crossover episode between Power Hour and Max and Sam, previewing the college football playoff national semifinals. Thank you so much for spending time with us. As a reminder, you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, wherever. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. We want to hear from you whenever you want. Give us some feedback, email us, send us questions. Hopefully we'll get to do this again because it was a blast. So for Max Olson, for Sam Kahn Jr., for Chris Vanini, I'm Nicole Auerbach. Thank you so much for hanging with us. Enjoy the games. We'll talk to you again soon.